Since the game's inception, we have had AFK hauling in EVE Echoes. In the early days, before we saw interdiction bubbles get introduced, any ship with an align time of under 1 second could safely AFK haul across nullsec and lowsec. Granted, these ships were for the most part frigates, and in my case I was using the Magnate Covert Ops due to its inertia modifier bonuses, but they represented an effortless way to move goods to and from Jita, and other places, but mostly Jita. Following the introduction of interdiction bubbles, the AFK hauling meta changed, and now the only ships that were safe were those with interdiction bubble immunity, those being interceptor frigates. From there, the Atron Interceptor and later its Tech 10 variant became the new ways to haul goods safely across the game. These ships came with significantly smaller cargo holds, reducing their utility and making it impossible to move larger items completely safely whilst AFK. But over time, as we saw new rigs, nanocores and even implants released, the size of the cargo holds of these interceptors recovered. Today, with T4 rigs, the right nanocore, and the mining implant levelled all the way up to level 30, one can achieve 2,000 cubic meters of storage space in an Atron 2 interceptor. But anyway, with the release of implants, we also saw a new form of sniping introduced into the game. Throughout the game's history, landing at 0 on a Stargate with the jump command already set, whether that be manually or via autopilot, we were able to be locked as we came out of warp. Then during the briefest of moments they would be vulnerable to receive damage before jumping on into the next system. Previously this exploit went mostly unnoticed by the masses, most notably because the ships that could lock onto the interceptors fast enough to land a shot wouldn't even come close to landing that final blow, and the AFK interceptor would move along without even knowing, and maybe even assuming the repair notification when they later undock from a station to be a random bug, because they don't remember getting shot at, do they? So what has changed? What changed was implants. Implants, when used correctly, could drastically boost a frigate's damage output, most notably with the Dramules, if memory serves me right. But it could be exploited by a number of other frigates at the time. During this short-lived period, pilots were encouraged to tank their Cargo-Ceptors if they didn't want to risk losing them and their precious cargo. I personally tanked my Cargo-Ceptor during this time so that a minimum of 3 Dramules would have to land a shot on my Atron 2 Interceptor for it to actually go down, and just carried on as I was before with my AFK hauling completely safe. Well, not completely. If there was enough Dramules on the gate then I would have gone boom, but I didn't. I was kind of comfortable with that. So yeah, I never received enough damage to even trigger that in-station repair notification. Now, as I said, it was short-lived, as after a number of players took to Discords to complain about this new meta, NetEase introduced a post-warp immunity period, whereby a ship that had just come out of warp couldn't be locked or lock for about 1 second. We've all experienced this phenomenon before, and this is where it all started to this particular phenomenon. So from there on out, AFK hauling interceptors were completely safe again. Some, like myself, kept their new tanky fittings in the event of a new exploit, game mechanic or whatever, but for the masses, those fragile Cargo-Ceptors continued flying just as before, because of course human beings, we don't like change, do we? Well, things just changed again. Just a mere couple of weeks ago we saw the introduction of Lancer Dreadnoughts, and if you don't know about them yet, check out the video I'll have linked at the end of this one, but the short of the story is, they fire an area of effect weapon that doesn't require the user to lock onto the target. With the previous threat to Cargo-Ceptors, we were getting shot down when landing on the Stargate exclusively. This time, it's a little bit different. This time the Cargo-Ceptors are vulnerable whilst cloaked up on a gate, whilst aligning for warp, and whilst coming out of warp. If you get caught in the area of effect of the Lancer's Doomsday weapon, you get hit with 50 points of warp jammer strength. Yeah, 50, and that's without applying any skills whatsoever. It doesn't matter that the Lancer's weapon takes 20 seconds to apply its full damage, because you sat perfectly still, taking all of that damage in. Now, if you happen to survive that entire volley, then after 30 seconds, the warp jammer effect will wear off and you'll be back into warp again. If you make the right gamble on which resistance to buff, and then invest in shield hit points through shield extenders, rigs, nanocore, general units and so on, you might be able to withstand a single blast completely AFK, wait out the timer and then get back on your journey without knowing. But that's a big if, and I'm not entirely sure if that is possible, as we'll see later in the video. But, and there is a but here, capital ships are big pricey targets and they don't often do solo gate camps. Okay, they do exist, and the advice above will save you against solo gate camps, but many capital ship pilots will have a fleet of support ships with them, especially for emergency purposes. If there is any form of DPS on grid that is not a capital, it will lock onto you and shoot you down before the warp disruption effect wears off, before you are able to warp off, in which case you're toast. If someone locks onto you with a warp disruptor module of their own, again, you're toast. And this is where I throw in a little addition to the script, as I completely missed this when I was doing the Lancer's walkthrough video last week. But there were skills for the Doomsday weapons themselves. Those skills drastically improve the Lancer's raw damage, in addition to buffing fuel consumption, capacity need, the warm-up time, beam duration, beam range, jammer strength, jammer duration, and last but not least, beam radius. The important ones for us there are beam duration, radius, range, and damage. Radius and range increases the odds of you getting caught in the blast, whilst the buffs to the damage and duration ensures that no interceptor, no matter how well tanked it is, can possibly survive. And up on screen right now will be an example of just how much damage even a well-tanked Cargo-Ceptor will take from a Lancer that hasn't trained the disruptive Lance operation skill at all, and without activating the siege mode, which by the way gives a further 100% damage bonus. The idea here was to see what its lowest damage output would be compared to a fully tanked Cargo-Ceptor. Now, my Interceptor, with its resistances spread across the board, because you don't know which Lancer weapon you're going to be going up against, dropped like a brick. Running the numbers without skills and siege, I expected it to survive with a little armour left over, and to die to anything that turned on siege mode or actually trained up the skills. But regardless, that Doomsday weapon would have one-shot me anyway, if the skills were trained or if siege mode was turned on in my original numbers. One theory that a guy in my corp is currently running with is that the damage possibly scales with the size of the target, but we're kind of still working on that one. But if that happened to be true, that would be quite an interesting one. But moving on, is this the end of AFK hauling? Not entirely. If you're moving exclusively through friendly territory, and no such gate camps have been reported in intel channels, then the odds are you're going to be fine. But you have to accept one important fact before you undock. There is a chance that everything in your cargo hold might be destroyed. If you cannot afford that risk, maybe, just maybe, it's a capital nanocore that you claimed in the wrong place, or some other high value untradeable item. In that case, your only option is to grab a friend and have them scout one jump ahead of you whilst you manually pilot. Also, you'll have to be more careful going forwards with regards to where you choose to claim your rewards, from the store, Concord Pass, or even login rewards. If you claim them in the wrong place, you are no longer guaranteed the ability to take them home safely with you. Maybe jump clone to a safe area and claim them first, then pod back. That's just an option. It's probably the least time consuming option, especially if you're deployed behind enemy lines. So what are my thoughts on this scenario? I quite like it, to be honest. Hauling in this game is something we all take for granted because of things like Cargo-Ceptors and Dormant Realm insurance fraud. And with what we are seeing with these new Lancer Doomsday weapons and the upcoming proposed changes to insurance, could very well see a rise in the number of players actively hauling within the game. And yes, hauling might seem a bit boring for some, but for some reason I've just always enjoyed it. I can remember all the way back when I was a member of a corporation called Smeghead Gaming, under the Alliance Eternal Armada. After we left the Quirius Coalition, we were accepted into Silent Alliance's umbrella and moved into the branch region. At the very beginning of this move, I grabbed my old Capsuleer outpost from Quirius and hauled it completely solo through silent space in a Bestower, fitted with a regular cloak, a macro warp drive, and as many inertia stabilizers as I could possibly fit in the lows. And I delicately flew past hostile after hostile, and on 2 occasions I just remained cloaked on gate as I waited out a hostile gate camp, slowly moving away meter by meter with my ship's own cloak, after they failed to figure out where exactly I decloaked for that briefest of seconds. And I found it fun in my own way, and I know someone is already cringing at my own reluctance to do the bare minimum and get someone to scout for me, but I knew what I was in for, and Capsuleer outposts can be rebuilt, and that one had already paid for itself, being anchored back in Quirius. So I didn't really feel like I had much to lose economically. It was definitely something I could afford to lose. But anyway, nowadays of course, we have covert ops cloaking devices for our haulers, which makes hauling 100 times more safer than the scenario that I just outlined. So the moral of the story though is that hauling doesn't have to be boring, and if you have the right music or audiobook on in the background, or even radio show, you could consider it a weird hybrid between, say, mining and PvP in terms of actual engagement with the game. Hell, certain members of my current corporation have probably noticed by now how rarely I take up the offer of their jump freighter services for moving things around, especially during the war. Well, I say during the war, technically it's still going, but at the onset of the big server war that saw Silent Alliance leave Declan, leave the North, I think I hauled the overwhelming majority of my stuff solo, just because I found it fun. But anyways, that's enough rambling from me. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you want to see more video essays like this one, and leave a comment about your thoughts on this situation, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Fly casual.